Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm Joey Dwyer here at Neyland Stadium after Vanderbilt's 48-24 loss to Tennessee. Vanderbilt falls to 2-10 with 10 consecutive losses, 5 consecutive losses to Tennessee, and in Clark Lea's third year goes winless in the SEC. A real step backward for a program that went into the season talking about a bowl game and thinking they had a realistic chance to go to a bowl game. That wasn't just coach speak. That wasn't just lofty expectation setting. This program felt like that would be the natural next step, and that's what it could do in year 3 of Clark Lee. It was proven wrong as it falls to 2-10 and doesn't pick up an SEC win. Tennessee outgained it 617-306 today, and it felt like Vanderbilt wasn't in this game for a lot of it. It really competed for the first 10 minutes, was loose, confident, felt like it had a chance, and it wasn't as fluky as some of Vanderbilt's fast starts, but they just didn't have enough, and it's really hard when you don't have the athletes that Tennessee has or a team like that to compete in these games and compete with these teams for an entire game, and it felt like that was the case for Vanderbilt. It got interesting before halftime with the little scuffles. It felt like there was some real bad blood there after 2 late hits on A.J. Swan, who I think deserves a lot of credit for the way he performed today. Didn't throw an interception after having those issues all season. Was tough, sat in the pocket through a lot of this game, even though there was some real pressure on him, and took some big hits before going out of the game later with a back injury that Clark Lee said he'll be fine from, but A.J. Swan really fought today and I think made some better decisions than he had in the past. You'd like to see that step from him, and now it's a question of whether Vanderbilt can retain him. It's a question of whether Vanderbilt can retain a lot of guys. How does the portal affect this team? And also, what does the coaching staff look like a year from now or even a couple months from now? It feels like there has to be some major changes when you have expectations of a bowl game and you publicly put those out there and say, we need to make a bowl game. We're taking that step forward. We're right there on the doorstep of it, and you don't perform and you're that far off from it. It's not like they went 5-7 again. They went 2-10, and obviously they're going to learn things from it, but it feels like something's got to give if that's the scenario. And for Vanderbilt, it feels like that has to be the case. There has to be some changes on the staff. Has to be some changes in terms of its roster makeup. Maybe it uses the portal more. Maybe it uses NIL a little bit more effectively moving forward. But something's got to give here. Vanderbilt's got to find a way to take a step forward in football. It can't just be what it's been the last couple of years. And this year, I think, was another step back. Vanderbilt really didn't have all that many close SEC games. Probably competed close to teams for 30 or 40 minutes total. And that can't be the standard for a team that's trying to go to a bowl game. You can't be losing to UNLV, who, by the way, is probably going to be a bowl team, but also not a team Vanderbilt should be losing to. And a lot of these issues are correctable. Clark Lee has to figure out a way to take a step forward as a program, though, whether that's personnel in terms of on-field players, whether that's his staff, whether that's pushing administration to give him more NIL money and give him more resources. There's got to be a fix here, and it feels like there certainly will be some movement within this program. You can't have a 2-10 team that had expectations of winning 6 games and expect to run the same team back. That's the definition of insanity, and it felt like this season kind of showed Clark Lee what he needs to do. He needs to be able to spend more money, and that's not really a him thing, but feels like maybe Vanderbilt's taking a step there. Probably got to use the portal more if they can loosen up the restrictions there, and he's also got to potentially make some staff changes, and it feels like that will be the case. Vanderbilt, I think, is a step behind everybody, and that's not a surprising take at this moment. That's not something that I think I'm going to get a whole lot of pushback on, but they're steps behind in places that other teams are steps forward in, and you see it on the field in games like this. Tennessee really had struggled the last 2 weeks, and Joe Milton threw for 4 touchdowns and was responsible for 6 today. And that's a guy that Tennessee fans wanted benched. Kind of shows you the talent differential between what Vanderbilt has on the defensive side and what other teams have on offense. One of the worst Power 5 defenses in the country. They have playmakers on that end too, which is why I'm a little confused as to why it was so bad. I think the pass rush was really poor this season, and it was today as well. I think the secondary play obviously was lived up to our negative hype in the preseason. It feels like they have players on their defense. Jalen Mahoney made a few great plays today, forced a fumble that I think was probably the turning point in this game, because if Vanderbilt gets that fumble that didn't get called back with Mahoney, it feels like it's got a real chance to capitalize on that momentum and find a way back in this game. But instead, it's 21-7 Tennessee, and from there, really, that was ball game. But Vanderbilt has really struggled with injuries on the defensive side, and it's also struggled just unit to unit. Langston Patterson, I think, is a real gem for them, and it's going to be important that they keep him this offseason. You'll see a lot about what they have NIL-wise and such by how they can retain these guys. Can they get C.J. Taylor back? Can they get Langston Patterson back? Can they get London Humphreys back? There's a lot of guys who will make impacts on this roster next year, but Vanderbilt's got to hold on and retain them first. That's probably my biggest question in the next week or two, as well as do they make coordinator changes? Vanderbilt's got a lot ahead of it. But it feels like it does have some pieces. Got to supplement that in the portal, like Clark Lee mentioned, though. And I think maybe the biggest thing for this team is you got to find a quarterback. A.J. Swan, I think, was their guy, but struggled early, got injured, and Vanderbilt, I think in 23 of Clark Lee's 27 games or something along those lines, they played two quarterbacks. Vanderbilt has to find an answer at quarterback, and A.J. Swan could very well be that, but there's also a possibility that A.J. Swan goes in the portal. There's a possibility that Ken Seals goes in the portal, and they still don't have an answer at quarterback. So Vanderbilt's got to find something, and if it's in this spot next year, even more changes are going to be made and going to be necessary. Vanderbilt, I think, can get away with keeping Clark Lee and buying into that vision this offseason, but also it has to look and say, this is unacceptable and this isn't the product that we need to put on the field. There's a lot of good players here, and again, you don't want to rag on those guys because those guys aren't the ones who are fully responsible for this. It's more of an infrastructure thing at Vanderbilt, but also you got to have guys who are impact guys and difference makers. You look at Vanderbilt's roster and say, man, there's only 3 or 4 guys maybe who would start for other SEC teams, so you got to get those guys back first, and then you got to find guys from other programs who can supplement your needs elsewhere and supplement your losses, because there's inevitably going to be some after a 2-10 season. But I want to talk a little more about today. I think maybe my big takeaway, because you knew Vanderbilt wasn't going to win this game. I was tricked for a second into thinking they can compete, but Tennessee obviously passed them by throughout the first half and was up a ton at halftime, outgained them by a ton. I love to see the energy that Clark Lee had towards the officials and towards sticking up for his guys. I think that's something that the fan base has really been on him about, and he really showed that he cares about his guys, and he's not a stonewall guy over there. Clark Lee, I think, showed a lot today in terms of getting on the officials, and I don't know that his team wants to fight because, I mean, he even said that in the presser. It's like, if you go to a practice, they're not often fighting. They're not a team that's undisciplined like that, or at least in that aspect. I think they're undisciplined in places like penalties at times, but that's not a team that wants to fight. But when it has to stick up for its guy like A.J. Swan and has to stick up to the officials for some missed calls and not getting the game under control, which I think was a big issue today. I think the officials kind of put the law down early in the second half, but really couldn't control that game for a lot of the first half. And I think that shows you a lot about why this game was as chippy as it was. And don't you just love to see that in a rivalry, though? It feels good to see Vanderbilt really embrace this kind of rivalry, and obviously not for that reason. A.J. Swan got banged up, and you hate to see that, but seeing the toughness and the fight out of this team, I think, was encouraging moving forward, that it's not a dead team. It's a team that wants to fight for each other. It wants to fight for its coaching staff, and it didn't do that in terms of the scoreboard, but you saw some tenacity out of this group. You saw them run up the ball a little bit better early. Didn't run it great. Only ran for 78 yards on a 2.6 yards per carry average. But at one point it was averaging over 7 yards. So there's flashes with this team. They have good receivers. They have good players in the second and third level on defense. They have some young pass rushers. It's got to come together, though, and 2-10 is not an acceptable season. Like I said, changes have to be made. And if Vanderbilt loses this badly again next season at this time, I don't really know what to tell you, because next year has to be a step year for this program. And we're going to talk about that a lot in the offseason, but this looked to be a step year. You can only get away with missing one step year. And Vanderbilt missed it this year in epic proportion. Didn't have a game where you left and were like, wow, they were awesome today. Hawaii kind of was in a funk early, and then Alabama A&M let them hang around for the first half and then lost 10 in a row. So I don't know how many ways I can say it's unacceptable, but it is, and Clark Lee knows that. It's obviously painful for him and his staff, but there's going to have to be changes made, and I think we look out for those in the next week or so. But Tennessee was bigger, it was stronger, it was faster, and it had a bigger margin for error. Kind of a microcosm of what we've seen from Vanderbilt this season, just not having the dogs and not having enough guys who make a difference to be able to stay in these games when it's not playing its best. Turnovers and poor blocking on the second level and all the little things, I think are important, but they become less important when you can get more talent in there. Can Vanderbilt do that this offseason? That's the big question, and can it be coached better next season? Another big question, but for now, program's not in a great spot. There's some optimism internally, I'm sure, but there's going to have to be changes made, and if this program is 2-10 again next year, there's going to be more major changes made. It's a tough schedule, but there's a path forward that is getting harder to see, but is somewhere in there, and Corkley's going to have to find it. It's going to be his job, assuming he keeps his job. I'd be surprised if he didn't, but that's all I got. Thank you guys for watching and sticking with us all season. We'll have basketball stuff for the next few months. And from Neyland Stadium, I'm Joey Dwyer. God bless. Shout out to the Wash House. Shout out to Sutherland and Belk and all our other great sponsors. I appreciate you guys, and thank you guys for watching. Peace.